Greetings, everybody. Welcome to TV Skywriter, emanating from my home here in Durham, North Carolina. Now, basically, now I have two versions of TV Skywriter nowadays. This is the regular edition held on Sundays. I talk to people all over the country about this and that. Writers, a writer is an author, isn't it? Artists, musicians, entrepreneurs, whatever. Now I have a new show for those of us in the Triangle area of North Carolina called TV Skywriter Local Edition, and that is basically for us here in the Triangle. Of course, anybody can watch it because it's going to be on YouTube anyway and Google Plus. But basically, most of my guests will be from the Triangle area. That's Durham, Raleigh, Chapel Hill, Hillsborough, etc., etc. So today's guest on TV Skywriter is a gentleman. He's from North Carolina, from Banner Elk, and I want you to tell us where that is. But our guest is David Finck. I found him on Google Plus. I was looking at his website. He makes, well, actually, there's two websites: furniture, guitars, violins. I just had to have him on. So welcome to the show, Mr. Finck.
Thank you, Pat. I appreciate it.
Very happy to have you here. Now, did you want to talk about furniture first or violins first? Because I first saw your violins online. That's what intrigued me about you.
Let's dive in with the violins. I'm calling myself a violin maker now. That's all I've done for the past couple of years, and that's my entire focus. So the furniture is part of my history. I did that for many, many years, but now all my efforts heading in the direction of violin making.
Okay.
It's a place to start.
Okay, well, before really talking about violins, though, let me ask you, how did you even get interested in woodworking, and how long did it take for you to get good, if that's a fair question?
Yeah, woodworking is very much a family legacy, I suppose. My grandparents were both interested in it on my dad's side, both my grandfather and my grandmother. My grandmother did sculpture in wood, and she was interested in a technique called chip carving, which is very intricate kind of decoration of flat surfaces typically.
Okay.
And my grandfather, he did it as a hobby, and he made little dovetail boxes and some other items as well. And then my dad picked it up from then, I'm sure, from them, that is.
Mm-hmm.
And so my dad, as I was growing up, always had a shop in the basement, and he'd be making all kinds of this and that. So that's, it was just around me as I was growing up. And my dad included me in building things. We made a sailboat in our living room when I was a kid. Two of them, actually. They were small. That one was 11 feet long. The other was about 13 feet long. But that's not what everybody's doing in their living room. And he had a lot of interest. He also built a floor loom, four-harness loom out of wood, and many, many other things. And it was just something I saw him doing, and I got to do a little sanding or something along the way, but I never thought of it as a calling for myself. And that is until probably I was in college, and he was in the process of building a guitar, and it was not going fast enough for me. I wanted to play that guitar, and at one point I decided I better use a little what I call child psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And he had the wood and the forms and the book and all that stuff, and I thought, well, if I start one, maybe that'll spur him to finish his faster.
Yeah.
Never thinking that I would actually finish it or make anything even playable. But at the end of the summer, I had finished the guitar and just got totally swept away by that process of fine woodworking. So while still in college, I found out about a woodworking program, a full-time school for woodworking, and I was out in California at the time. So I enrolled in the College of the Redwoods Fine Woodworking Program, which is up on the north coast of California, a little town called Fort Bragg, and studied with not Fort Bragg, North Carolina, but there's one out there in California as well, right on the coast in the redwood forests. It's absolutely gorgeous country. And a little school had started there not 4 years before I enrolled, and it was led by a man named James Krenov, who is very well known in fine woodworking circles. He's a well-known author, and has done a lot of gorgeous work of its own. He's passed away now, but he started a school up there through a community college, so that made it very affordable, and I thought it was just a great opportunity to learn more about woodworking. So that's definitely where I got good, uh, if you want to put it that way, because it was 6 days a week, 8 hours plus a day, just wood, 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 with great work going on all around you, incredibly world-class instruction, and just a phenomenal atmosphere to soak up woodworking skills.
That's wonderful. Now when you're learning woodworking, do you start with simple, more blocky type projects like bookcases, and then get into the fine work and learn how to make curvy type things like violins? Or do you start in right from the beginning learning that real fine work?
Well, you start in with the fine work, but you're kind of on the right track because curves add a whole nother element.
Hmm.
But you start square one learning how to handle the tools. And that particular approach that I learned there is very much hand tool focused. But we had a complete shop of machine tools, but we looked at the machinery as maybe like apprentices, from 18th century woodworking. The machines were there to do the grunt work, flatten the board, saw it up into smaller bits, and then you use the hand tools to do very refined work, to work with a lot of accuracy, to get super smooth surfaces, to adjust joints and the fit of things. So that's where we started. We started off by making some of our own tools. We started off making the hand planes, making little carving knives, and then from there we did some exercise learning how to use hand planes, and then all the basic joints that you find in fine woodworking, like dovetail joinery and mortise and tenon, all that sort of thing, the frame and panel, even just edge joining two boards together. To do that well with a hand plane is not the easiest thing in the world. So that's kind of like the ABCs.
Okay.
Once you can do that well, then yeah, you would start off on a small project. But it really depended on your skill coming in.
Hmm.
I was one of the people that came in with relatively little bit of experience, but there was still what I would call a pent-up demand for Krenov teaching at that time. So
Okay.
there were people that were very, very accomplished who wanted to study with the master and take it to the next level. So those guys were champing at the bit,
Oh,
and people that already had a lot of skill, they started in with amazing work right away.
wow. And one more question before you show us some of your work. Another thing I want to ask you about beginning woodworking. Do you start out with cheaper woods like pine, and I don't know if oak is considered cheap. I don't know, but I heard that when you make really fine things like violins, you use these exotic woods. I can't imagine starting out using expensive woods. Am I right?
It's very easy to ruin a piece of wood pretty quickly when you're starting out, especially with power tools. You
Yeah.
know. So yeah, I mean it's judicious to start off with stuff. You can find beautiful, beautiful woods that don't have to be expensive, though. I mean, I've seen incredible work done with number two pine, knotty pine that was just
Hmm.
worked sensitively and with a lot of passion and a lot of thought in the design. And it's really not the cost of the wood or its scarcity that defines how beautiful the item's going to be
Oh.
in the end. So, I mean, I've used very expensive wood and I've used very inexpensive wood, but I don't think it's a requirement that you have expensive wood to do nice work by any means. So,
Huh.
yeah, I'm sure most people starting off are going to go to the neighborhood lumber yard and start with their cheaper things. And when they get more into it and more infected with what we used to call wood lust, where you just have
Yeah.
to get the biggest and the best and the most beautiful and the rarest stuff, then you start accumulating those kind of things, and you want to try working with them at least once or twice.
Where do you even get fancy wood? Because when you go to
Well,
those, you just see pine and.
yeah. Well, there are lumber yards that specialize usually in higher grade woods or imported woods, exotic woods, from the rainforests of the world. I stopped using a lot of that stuff though years and years ago. When I, in school you would see a lot of that, and people brought their own stashes of woods from all over the world. So I saw, Tasmanian blackwood and African kingwood and this, that, and the other thing, Andaman padauk and all these exotic sounding things. And it makes you want to delve into them. But, when I was working as a furniture maker and very much in the public eye, say at a craft show, there I am with some wood that came from an Amazonian rainforest. And even though a person like me using a board is probably not going to be contributing to the problems of deforestation in areas like that, when you're out in the public eye, it sort of brings that to the front. So, I had discussions with people about, maybe not using that type of wood because it just encourages other people to want to use that sort of wood as well. And when you have pressures like that in sensitive environments, it's something to think about. So I stopped using a lot of those woods and really mostly concentrated on domestic hardwoods and softwoods and being more interested in the design and the sensitive use of whatever I have in front of me to make something really beautiful.
That's a really nice way of looking at it. That's really, really nice. Can you show us one of your violins?
Oh, sure. This is one I just finished and strung up recently. This is number 9. That's the front, of course, and the back you can see it has this very vivid figure.
Yeah.
We call this curly maple. Some people call it fiddleback maple, and that rippling of the grain gives a real multi-dimensional surface. And it's a curve, but it's a smooth surface, but it kind of looks like it's got hills and valleys all over it just from that wild nature of the grain.
So I can see like a line going down the middle of the back. So obviously you're using more than one piece?
That's right, yeah. I'll give you an idea of that. Like here's a couple of pieces of wood that are typical of what you would get when you're purchasing wood for a violin. This is 2 pieces, you can see. Thicker in the middle where the joint is, and they thin out to the edges. Are you seeing that all right? Yeah, so these pieces were originally split out of a block of wood just like that as a wedge. And then they were split down the middle again, or sawn down the middle, to give 2 matching halves. So that's the way violin wood is usually acquired if you're not getting it yourself, but you buy it from the specialty dealer that has cut it just right, split the wood from a billet so that the grain is as strong as possible, and then there's lots of very specific selection criteria.
Well, I know that maple is really strong, isn't it?
Yeah, in fact, this is the top wood, and the top is made out of spruce typically. So this is spruce that came from Colorado. It's called Engelmann spruce. And I've got another chunk of wood. For instance, here's a piece of curly maple that will be for the neck. You can see it's a thick chunk.
Oh, yeah.
The entire neck and scroll will be carved out of this one chunk of wood. And I can show you one other piece here, too. Here's another piece of curly maple. And you can sort of see the bars cutting across it. Even this is just a rough piece of wood, but you can already see that figure is apparent in the grain. And this is just an extra thick piece before it's been sawn like the top. But yes.
Now, I just don't know anything about woodworking. I can't imagine. What kind of tool do you use to shape it into a violin?
Well, you start off with this block of wood that's glued up like that, right?
Amazing, yeah.
Okay, that's how you begin. And then you trace the outline on that of a violin, and you just saw that out. And you can do that with a hand saw or a band saw, a motorized band saw. I use a band saw since I have one. And then you have to carve all those contours. And I have a couple of little tools here that I can show you that are used. This is a a little finger plane.
Oh,
You see that
wow.
all right?
And plane, you kind of drag that across to flatten it out, right?
That's right. Here's the blade that comes out the back, and here's the part
Wow.
that does the cutting. And that's just a small plane, but I've got one that's even smaller that's
Oh,
also
my goodness,
used.
adorable.
See that? They're very small, but these allow you to get into the tight spots of a violin and remove material. When I begin, I'm carving away with a regular carving gouge, like most people are familiar with. And then here's another little unusual tool called
Hmm.
a I'm not even actually sure what you call it, to be honest. It might be a spoon shave, something like that. But it has a little blade here, and you actually pull the handle, kind of
Uh-huh.
spoon shaped. But you pull that handle, and here's the blade right here, and it cuts nice shavings. So
Okay.
I use that quite a bit for working the inside of the violin top and back when I'm shaping them. Because first you have to shape the outside, but then
Hmm.
you also have to carve the inside so that you end up with a very thin plate of wood by the time you're done.
See, that's the weird thing. The wood, by the time you're done with making the violin, the wood is very thin, but then it has to be very strong. And then when you string the strings across it, that wood has to be really powerful not to pop, right?
That's exactly right. And in just about all stringed instruments, that is the quandary: how to make the instrument strong enough to withstand the force of those strings.
Wow.
But if you make it too strong, it won't vibrate. And it's those vibrations that move the air that we hear as beautiful music. So
I
you
never
have to
thought of
learn.
the vibrations. You mean the vibration of the
Well,
string
let's see.
or
You
the
put a
wood?
bow on a string, and that string starts to vibrate as you pull the violin bow across the string.
Right.
Now, that's where all the energy starts.
Yeah.
Those vibrations go through the bridge, that the strings are arched over,
Yeah.
and that bridge is in contact with the top, and the top starts to move. So it's taking the vibrations of the string, and the whole role of the violin is to amplify those vibrations so that we can hear it as sound. If you just if
Oh.
you just take a string that's attached between 2 points and pull a bow across it, you'll hear a sound, but it's really weak, really weak. It takes that box of the violin that's so beautifully engineered to amplify that sound, that vibration, to create the amazing amount of sound that comes out of a violin.
Huh. I never thought of the violin vibrating, but I guess that's key.
Yeah,
So if you make it
that's
too
all it
thick,
is. It's an amplifying, vibrating box, and the
huh.
whole purpose is to amplify those vibrations of those strings.
Okay, so how long does it take for you to get your blocks of wood and shape it into a basic when I say basic, I mean before you put all the nice little finishes and the strings on it.
To just do the woodworking,
Yeah.
basically, no, it's probably on the order of a month or so. Give or take, it just depends. Sometimes the wood itself can present a challenge. You know, the curlier, the more vivid the figure on that maple, the more difficult it tends to be to work, and you have to work more slowly
Hmm.
in order to end up with nice surfaces. So that can slow you down or speed you up depending on the nature of the wood itself. But it's more or less a month's work.
Do you have to worry about humidity at all? I know that people who own violins and guitars worry a lot about humidity once they purchase the instrument. But when you make the instrument, do you have to worry about humidity at all?
I'm very concerned about that, yes. I maintain my shop at about 45% humidity all the time. So I have I'm either running a dehumidifier or a heater. I rarely have to add humidity. That's never a problem, it seems like, in North Carolina. It never seems to get too dry. But trying to keep moisture out of the air as I build. For most things, especially instruments, which are really sensitive to changes in humidity, you're safer if you're going from dry to damp. When the things swell up, they
Uh-huh.
might move, but they don't crack. When things go from medium to excessively dry, that's when you have
Oh
problems
yeah,
with
yeah.
cracking. So I tend to keep the shop, that would be, on the drier side of the scale, but sort of in the middle at the same time.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't want to create a situation where I build it really dry, and then it's going to be kept considerably more humid. Um, then all the settings and adjustments that I do may go out of adjustment. So I
Okay.
think 45% is a pretty good percentage to be around. Especially especially true when I was building guitars, because violins don't have near the problems with moisture changes as a guitar does. With a guitar, you really need to stay on top of that.
Okay. Okay. So when it comes to your making the violins, do you have to know the person who's going to purchase the violin first? The reason I'm asking that, it might be a weird question. I'm assuming that when you make a violin for a classical orchestra player, I'm thinking maybe is that the same instrument as making an instrument for a jazz or country music player? Is that a different instrument or?
You've got several questions kind of wrapped
I
up
know, I know.
in the one, but so I'll sort of break it down a little bit. Um, well, first you asked if I'm making for a specific person, which,
Yeah.
I'm not actually. I'm building violins, and I'm trying to make each one its own unique thing.
Mhm.
Um, and it's almost impossible for me to make two violins that sounded exactly the same, even if I tried. I'm finding that
Oh,
they all sound good, but they each have their own personality. They're just maybe a little brighter, or a little darker, or a little silkier, a little bolder. So each one seems to have its own personality. So I'm not building on mission. I'm just creating an inventory that musicians can select from. So they find the one they want, and then everything's good. If somebody commissions me expecting a certain type of sound, but I don't hit it with that violin, that would be a disappointment to both of us.
oh,
So in
yeah.
that sense, I'm not commissioning. I'd rather have existing instruments that people can just try and hopefully fall in love with. But you have another question wrapped up in there, which was, well, are these different kind of instruments?
Yeah.
The orchestral or the jazz or the classical? And that's a variation of the old question, what's the difference between a violin and a fiddle in a nutshell, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
And um, I'll just quote you what a young man told me. Oh, not didn't tell me, but I saw him respond to that same question. He said the fiddle has, or sorry, he said the violin has strings and the fiddle has strangs.
Right.
Strangs. I
Okay.
mean, basically what he's saying is, one's city and elegant and sophisticated, and one's kind of country and down home, but it's really the same thing. And
Okay.
that's largely true. But on the other hand, there's also some other stuff going on in there, because one of the differences you might find between an orchestral instrument and a fiddle or a country type instrument would be the strings themselves. So strings are made out of different materials,
Oh,
and a lot of fiddlers prefer strings that are made out of metal. And most classical players play strings that are either have a synthetic core, like some type of nylon, basically, or in
okay.
the old days they used gut. We used to call it cat gut, but it's really sheep gut.
Yeah. Hmm.
So it's the lining of the intestines were processed and stripped out to make the strings. So that gives the instrument a real different character. The metal strings are really cutting and really powerful and very bright. And that's kind of what fiddlers like. They want to be heard over those guitar players and
Hmm.
everybody else. And orchestral players are tending to look for a smoother, rounder, kind of richer sound, and they like to hear lots of overtones. The,
Okay.
um, the nylon strings and the gut strings have those characteristics.
So how do you check your progress as you're, making your each violin? Because I'm assuming that you make one violin at a time. I mean, you don't make all the necks at once and a bunch of bodies at once, at the same time, do you?
Some things I actually do group together like that. But for instance, if I'm taking those two pieces of wood and gluing up the joint in the center, well, I'll probably go ahead and glue a bunch of those when I'm set up to do that. But then they get set aside. But you're right. When I'm starting on a violin, it's basically one at a time.
Okay.
Um, and it's just a step by step process. It's kind of like building a house. It's like, how do you build a house? You you add one stick to the other, right, until you've
Yeah.
got the house. And that's the way it is in building a violin. There's, people can take it in different procedures. You could start with the neck and then build the body, or you can start with the body and then build the neck. You can bend the sides first and then carve the top and the back, or you can carve the top and the back and then bend the sides. So, there's a lot of leeway in terms of the steps and how you go about doing it.
Can you show us how I know you said you're not a professional fiddler or violin player or whatever, but can you show us a little bit?
Yeah, I'm so far from a professional. I'm not even an amateur. I told you about how I got into fine woodworking, but I didn't really tell you how I got into violin making. And that really came about because of an interest that sort of developed between myself and my daughters when they were very young in playing violin. So I got them started with Suzuki violin at a very, very young age. They were 2 and 4. My daughters, Lita and Willa, Willa was 2, Lita was 4 when they first started playing. And through the years, they progressed quite a bit. They got very, very good. And I decided at one point I needed to build a violin for them. I wasn't a player, though. I'm a guitar player. And those violins came out really, really well, and that's what made the switch for me from a furniture maker, guitar maker, into a violin maker. So with that said, I'm not much of a player, but I can draw a bow across a string. So
Okay.
we'll pick up one of the violins and at least let you hear what it sounds like, even if I can't play a tune.
That's fine. Go ahead.
I'm just getting started now that my daughters aren't around anymore. They're both studying violin in conservatories, so I don't have great fiddlers in the family anymore to check out my violin for me. So I'm starting to learn myself, and I'll see if I can play you a scale. That's about as far as I've progressed at this point.
Okay. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you.
So that's
All
what I'm
right.
looking for, though, is you hear those ringing notes.
Yeah. Nice.
This violin,
Nice tone. Really nice tone.
thank you. So if a person with my level of skill can draw out a decent tone, that says something for the violin, not the violinist,
I
But
understand.
I am building violins though for people that are at a high level of playing. So, and violin is a very difficult instrument to assess if you're not a player, because it's not like a guitar where you can just strum the strings and
Sure.
anybody can do that and you can hear the power and the resonance of that instrument.
Sure.
Violin, there's so much technique in just drawing the bow across the strings that that takes years to really get good at doing that. So I have to work with professional players now
Hmm.
to assess my instruments when I'm done with them and find out if I need to make any sorts of adjustments, that sort of thing. Unless my daughters are at home. If they're home, then I've got that built right in.
There you go. So if a professional musician came to your showroom to try out some violins, I'm just curious what they do and how long it takes for them to really. I'm sure you have to bond with the violin. You just don't say, "Oh yeah, that looks nice. That sounds pretty good."
It's a really interesting question because I've seen a lot of people now, and everybody seems to have their approach to it.
Uh-huh.
Some people are incredibly methodical, and they want to play every note on every string right up to the end of the fingerboard
Wow.
by half steps, so G, G sharp, A, B flat, all the way up to the very end of the fingerboard. And they're just listening to the quality of the note, because every violin will have a certain unevenness in the output on particular notes, and they want to hear where those spots are, if there's any treble notes that are just sounding strange for some reason or another. Often those kind of spots can be adjusted and dealt with by the maker, but sometimes they're inherent in the design and the way that particular instrument came out. And then you have other people that just pick it up and start to play whatever they're playing right then and there, and just want a general feel for it. But that would really only be the beginning of the process, because it's a really complex thing. You know, the violin may sound one way in a particular room, but you go to another room and it may sound completely different. So the whole sound experience is not just the instrument. It's the instrument plus the room, plus maybe even how many people are in the room. You know, if you go to an empty auditorium and play a violin, it may sound very different than it does when it's full of bodies, because every one of those bodies absorbs energy and reflects energy differently. So somebody who's a professional player will really want to hear it in a hall, a recital hall. They'll want to hear it maybe with other people that they play with. So they may like the violin by itself, but if they're in a quartet, they may not like the way that it blends with the other instruments in their quartet. So it's not really just come and try it. Yes, that's stage one.
That makes sense, because if you're playing in a like a quartet, string quartet, and your sound is a little harsher than the violin that you currently have, your partners might not like that, right?
That's right.
Ooh, so they have to borrow the violin for a while, I take it.
Exactly. Yeah. So with violins, I offer 2 weeks for a trial period. So, and if you're a younger player, like the instruments I'm making are appropriate for kids that are studying seriously, say at a music school or in a conservatory, or for professional players as well. But if you're in a conservatory, you're going to do stage one on yourself, just by your own likes. But then you might take it to your teacher and say, how does this sound? Have your teacher give you some feedback. It may sound one way under your own ear as you're playing, but the listener experiences something different. So you might have your friends play it for you, or your teacher play it for you, and say, do you like the way it's sounding when someone else plays it? There are so many factors.
Wow.
Even different bows make the sound of an instrument, a violin, sound quite different. And you would think it would just be very subtle, but it's very noticeable how a different bow can bring out different qualities in the tone of a violin.
So do you make the bows too?
No, I don't make the bows. That's considered a separate profession, to be a bow maker. And bows in themselves are a complete art. The mechanics of a bow, I've got this rather inexpensive one right here, but this little part, this ebony part here, is called the frog, and it's made out of ebony. All types of sophisticated shaping that happens, and there's metal parts, so you have to have some jeweler skills. Here at the button, with this part that goes over the back, the pearl that you work with, even shaping what's called the stick. Is very sophisticated. The way this tapers and getting the curve just right. So it takes a lot of experience to build a very nice bow. And there's a few people that do both, but I don't know of anybody really that's recognized for being a great violin maker and a great bow maker.
And the string part, or the part that hits the string, rather.
The hairs.
Is that still horsehair?
Yes. Yeah, that's still horsehair. Most of it comes from China, or Siberia, Mongolia. It's collected by hand. It's sorted by hand. There's something like, 150 hairs that go into each violin bow, more or less. And each one of those is graded, because some hairs are kind of kinky or not even in their thickness throughout, and really perfectly cylindrical, nice hairs. So that each hair gets hand sorted and then put into big bundles and sold to violin makers, bow makers. A lot of violin makers will rehair a bow. Now, I've done plenty of that. where, you know,
Yeah.
because the hairs break as they get used, and every
Mm-hmm.
so often the violinist needs the hairs replaced. That's not the simplest procedure either, to get it stretched out in a nice even ribbon with the same tension on each of the hairs.
Yeah.
But that's a lot easier than making a bow. And when you've got a couple of kids that play violin, just it's a nice thing to be able to rehair their bows, because it's not an inexpensive thing to do.
I did not know so much work went into making the bows. We were just talking about the
Yeah,
violin. Wow.
it's
So if
pretty
it takes,
phenomenal.
so if you're taking a month to pretty much get the basic shape of the violin down, how long does it take to put together all of the different? Because there's the pegs and the neck and the
Right.
all
Well,
the
that's
little.
called the setup. What we call the setup is fitting the pegs, and actually, you asked about some specialty tools. I have this little tool here, which
Mm-hmm.
is nothing but a kind of heavy-duty, sophisticated pencil sharpener. And this is
Wow.
what's used
You make the
to put a
peg.
very precise taper on the peg.
Wow.
So that's how you shape the peg. With this,
You know what? I thought you bought the pegs and attached them. You make the pegs too.
well, no, you could go either way. Most people buy them, and I do buy them, but they come as what we would call a blank, an oversized peg that then has to be shaped just the right taper and fit to the holes that you create with a reamer that's a tapered hole. So the peg is tapered very precisely to the taper of the reamer that you use to create that tapered hole. And the only practical way to do that is if the maker does both of those things to end up with a nice fit. Um, so yeah, there's that. There's creating the bridge also. I don't know if we can see that here, but let
Uh
me turn
huh.
it this way. This is the bridge of the violin.
Uh huh.
And that comes supplied as a blank for most people. Will purchase that as well, but it's again it's oversized, and it has to be fit very carefully so
Hmm.
that the feet where it contacts the violin fit the
Yeah.
curvature of the violin top just perfectly without a gap. So it has
Wow.
to be fit to the instrument, and then it has to be thinned out considerably. The curve on the top has to be done just so to match the fingerboard and get the right heights of the strings above the fingerboard. So there's a lot of shaping that happens on the bridge as well. That's, you know, a couple of hours work to fit the bridge nicely itself. So doing all that type of setup ends up being, you know, maybe another day or two, something like that. There's one other essential part that a lot of people are unaware of, which I can't really show you, but residing in this hole and spanning right under this foot of the bridge to the back of the instrument is the part called the sound post. Have you ever heard of
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I've seen that. Hmm.
Okay. Well, the sound post has to be fit really carefully too, and that's kind of a almost a blind procedure. You're fitting a dowel of wood
Hmm.
so that the ends of the dowels fit exactly the top and the back of the violin at just the right amount of pressure, and it's, you know, rather cumbersome to get in there
Yeah.
and place it. You know, we use this tool called a sound post setter
Oh.
to do that. So you stick that sharp end of the sound post setter into the sound post,
Uh huh.
and then you feed it right into the F hole right there and set the sound post with this tool.
Nice.
Fairly tricky. Takes some time to get that set just right. But if it's not set right, the violin just doesn't sound right at all. You get
Right.
all sorts of problems.
Now, I don't want to ask you a question about each and every little part, but I
Yeah.
am mystified. The last question I'm going to ask about the technique is, how is the neck attached? Because I can see I might not be using the right terms, but the part of the neck is elevated above the body, but I'm asking about the back part that's connected. How do
Yeah.
you connect that?
I just happen to have my 10th violin, which is right at that point, and I'm going to go get that and show
Ooh,
you.
ooh,
Because
okay.
it'll be a lot easier to show you than tell you.
Awesome. Ooh.
So this is violin 10, which is
Uh-huh.
what we call in the white. It doesn't have a finish on yet.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
what you can see here is a little apparatus for holding a bridge temporarily in place in position. That's
Huh.
a piece of bent coat hanger. And that's holding the bridge right in the center of the instrument, exactly where it's supposed to be when it's strung
Wow.
up. And then what I do is I fit that joint from the neck to the body.
Uh-huh.
I have to make sure that the neck is pointing exactly at that. And it
Yeah.
also has to be, if I extended a line from the fingerboard, it would have to hit that bridge at a particular height,
Okay.
which would, for some people is 26 millimeters off of the belly. Some people it's 27 millimeters, but it's very precise.
It's
Now I have,
beautiful how it floats above the body like that. It's just beautiful.
I'm going to take this little clamp off here because I have this temporarily clamped.
Okay.
And then you can see, perhaps you can see, I've got two pieces
Wow.
here now.
Look at that.
So here, can you see that joint there?
I do.
Okay, it's a kind of a trapezoidal
Hmm.
shaped little pocket there that we'd call the mortise.
Okay.
And the sides of that and this back surface here have to be angled just right so that everything lines up the way I was just describing with the fingerboard and the bridge. And then the end of the fingerboard is shaped to be just like that pocket. So
Yeah.
the two fit together and then they're glued. Now what also helps quite a bit is at the bottom here, this little tab
Uh-huh.
is called a button. And that's actually a part of the back. It's just a little extension of the back. See
Mm-hmm.
how that comes out there?
Yeah.
So that gets glued also to the bottom of the neck, and that plays a very important role because without that, the joint would probably fail before too long. But
Mm-hmm.
that really counteracts the pull of the string. If you kind of think about the geometry of what's going on there, that's very, very helpful in counteracting the pull of the strings. So, I don't know if you can see this very well or not.
Yes.
That basically just slips right in there,
Beautiful.
and
Beautiful.
if it's fit well, it'll just hold together by its own strength, and that's just
Nice.
about there. And I'm like about a half a millimeter too high still, so I have a tiny bit of work bringing this down to
Mm-hmm.
lower the relationship of the fingerboard to the bridge
Okay.
before I'm done. And as soon as I'm done, then it's time to glue the two together.
Wow.
So that's
Thanks for showing us. I mean, this is beautiful. Beautiful work.
okay.
So I'm guessing, well, let me not guess. Let me just ask straight out. The designs of the violins that are played nowadays, the violins that you're making, have they changed at all since the Middle Ages, or have
Um,
they so well designed that there's no improvements even necessary?
That's pretty much the case. I mean, of
Wow.
course, there's electric violins, which are a whole different territory, but for these acoustic instruments, they have changed very, very little since, um, well, let's say the late 1500s. It was pretty well
Wow.
established. Now, at one point, I'd say into the Romantic era of the classical music, which sometime in the 1800s, players wanted to get a little more power out of these instruments. And what makers realized is they could change the neck a little bit in
Mhm.
order to um, make it a little longer and alter the string angle a little bit so that the string as it goes over the bridge maybe has a little more angle, puts a little more pressure on the top. So they made these modifications that made the instruments a little louder. So if you look at, everybody's heard of Stradivarius, right?
Sure.
The most celebrated Italian violin maker. I don't know if there's any of his violins that have survived that have not been modified in that way. So the neck has been altered on his instruments and almost all of the old Italian instruments to accommodate the modern player starting sometime in the 1800s. And
Do,
then
do you think it's modern players or just bigger audiences?
it was both actually. That's the era when the virtuoso player came in, um, and that sort of demanded a whole different type of instrument in terms of its presence. But
Okay.
also, you're right. You went from
Harmony,
chamber music, where it was just small rooms, to filling larger and larger halls,
Yeah.
and the musicians just wanted louder and louder instruments, and that was the primary way that they got at that. But yeah, so it's an amazingly well realized design, though.
Hmm.
Outside of that one change, the basic design of the instrument uh, is unchanged in many, many, many years, and makers, myself included, still use older instruments as models that we build from. So the instrument that I was just showing you and played a few notes on, that's patterned after a Stradivarius from a particular date and time. That's a well-regarded instrument. Um, and we have some very precise measurements of the dimensions, the thicknesses of the top and the back, and all types of interesting relationships that are there. They're existing. These are instruments that work really well, so we try to copy those largely to hopefully end up with another instrument that sounds really, really good too.
This must be really satisfying work, am I right? I mean,
Well, for a person like me, it certainly is. I can just cozy up to a piece of wood and with a chisel in my hand and listen to the music and watch the deer outside my window and carve all day long and be extremely satisfied. Yes, but that's only half of the cycle, though. The other half is putting it into a musician's hands and
exactly.
seeing them light up. And
So
that's
how do
when
you
the
get the
circle
word out
is complete.
about your violins? How do you market them so the musicians do hear about your work?
Well, I have several ways I'm doing that right now. Um, an effective way is to meet with teachers at schools.
Huh.
So I introduce myself, show them what I make, and I'm just starting to do that. And I've been getting a nice reception with the people that I have visited. And if a teacher likes your instrument, then perhaps the students will respond as well, or the teacher may be inclined to say, "Hey, check out this guy who's got some good violins." Um, Another good way is to market them through established shops, but
Hmm.
I haven't done that yet. My main thrust, though, is with using the internet for marketing.
Oh, cool.
So I have a very experienced person that I'm working with web design and the use of social media,
Hmm.
and he's getting the word out for me, basically, and designing an effective website. Now, of course, you have to be able to play the violin to analyze it. So that's part and parcel of um, having people sending them a violin for that 2-week trial period so they can
Hmm. Hmm.
give it a shot and see if it's for them or not.
Are there violin makers who make student? I know that when you play in marching band or whatever in high school, there are student model trumpets. I don't know firsthand. I just know what somebody told me. Is that the same in the violin world, where there are student, in other words, less expensive, maybe not as elegant instruments for students?
Oh, absolutely. Now, I mentioned briefly that my daughters started when they were 2 and 4. So, what are you putting in the hands of a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old? Nothing that you spend a whole lot of time on, right? So you wouldn't give a handmade instrument to a child at that age. You'd be setting both of yourselves up for some major disappointment, I think. So there are factory-made instruments for violin that give a student the experience they need, just for developing their technique, but it's nothing that you can play with a lot of nuance or get very good sound out of. So at a certain stage, most students that keep with it, once you hit high school or beyond, you're pretty much out of the factory-made or mass-produced instruments, and you're ready for something that's made by hand, where the maker can really fine-tune the instrument and just try to get the best sound out of it and really um, customize that setup so it works for the player.
Yeah, because I would think if you do run across, or if a teacher runs across a very, very talented student who really wants to make this a career, I suppose eventually you'd want that student to use a handcrafted violin so that the sound inspires the student.
Oh, totally, totally. I mean, there's nothing kind of more depressing for a student than not being able to get the sound they need because the violin is not capable of doing it. It's not
Yeah.
responsive enough. or this kind of goes back to the fiddle and the violin question too. You know, if you start playing in the upper positions on your violin, um, and the sound just deteriorates, it doesn't sound very good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what I would call a fiddle because
Yeah.
most instruments sound fine, you know, down in the first position or down at the end of the fingerboard where most people start playing.
Mm-hmm.
It's as you get to those higher notes that the sound can really start to break down. And as you get more advanced, especially classically, then you're playing in higher positions, and you really need that full range. Now, that's not to say that other players don't either, because that jazz players are certainly all over the instrument, and really just about every genre now has virtuoso players in it that need a responsive instrument all over the instrument, not just in the first position.
Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate you being on our show,
Yeah,
David Finck. And if people want to learn more, can you tell us about both of your websites, if you don't mind?
sure. Um, for violins, the address there is davidfinkviolins.com. And I'll let folks know that my last name is spelled F like Frank, I-N-C-K. So it's when you say David Finck, don't forget to put the C before the K,
Okay.
davidfinkviolins.com. And that has everything that I'm doing with violins on it right now. And then kind of as an archive, I have my furniture making website, which also has some guitars and stuff on it as well. But that's just called davidfink.com. So again, it's F-I-N-C-K and davidfink.com, and you can see a variety of the types of furniture I've made over the years, which is everything from little jewelry boxes and to church altars and things in between, desks and chairs and tables, all that good stuff.
So what if somebody wants one of those gorgeous? Because I love the church altars. They're the one, at least on your website, is curved instead of straight up and down.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what if somebody does want one of those? You don't make furniture anymore at all?
You know, I guess I'm downplaying that to the effect that I'm not getting any requests for that. So luckily, I haven't had that problem
Okay.
um, where that's not happening. But I would probably turn them down right now because I'm just so into what I'm doing with the violins, and I'm really trying to push that and get as good as I can with that, and make as strong an effort as I can to get this whole ball rolling. So, yeah, the furniture is really on the back burner now. Even
Mhm.
the guitars, I've got a few folks interested in guitars, but I've told them they're going to have to wait a little bit.
Yeah.
Now,
So, so where you're located, which is Banner Elk, what market, what big city are you near? And would you say that most of your customers come from the local area, or like you said, internet?
uh, I'm so my address is Banner Elk, but I'm actually located much closer to Boone.
Oh,
Um,
okay, I've heard of
if
them.
you know where Boone is, it's about 2 hours, hour and 45 minutes west of Winston-Salem, right up in the mountains,
Yeah.
getting close to the Tennessee border. So, it's a pretty far haul from anywhere, but a lot of people do come up here for vacationing because it's a recreational area. There's skiing and golfing and rivers and rocks to climb and trails to hike and all that kind of stuff. Um, but no, this is very much mostly going to be an effort of me coming to them or my violins coming to them by way of shipping companies. Um, or if I'm visiting schools, that would be an opportune time for people to actually try one out. So I'm not real close to particular markets, which that's a hurdle one needs to get over. And there's certain advantages probably to being set up in New York City or Chicago or Raleigh or Charlotte. But you know, you're either dealing with a lot of competition there, or you saturate your market there anyhow, and you have to go elsewhere too. So I'm trying to stay on the bright side here, and I
Yeah.
think this has a good shot of working with any.
So our local symphonies, like North Carolina Symphony, Durham Symphony Orchestra, do they know about you? Do they get their instruments from you?
I don't know to what degree they know about me. There has been some opportunities for them to know about me. For instance, when I finished my first violin, which was just a couple of years ago, I presented that to my oldest daughter, Lita, at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And Lita was going to school at Chapel Hill, and she had competed that very day in the Durham Symphony Concerto competition.
Oh.
She happened to win the competition. So a few weeks later, she was playing with the Durham Symphony and as a soloist. And
Sweet.
she was using that first violin that I made. so,
Wow.
so they, that was actually made known at the orchestra. So folks should know. And I've been kind of meeting people here and there. I'm not sure if it's universally known. I kind of doubt that. But and then similarly with my younger daughter Willa, she competed in a concerto competition with the Asheville Symphony at this end of the state last spring.
Uh-huh.
She happened to win that competition, and a few months later she was performing as a soloist with the Asheville Symphony. And now Willa also won another competition with the NC Symphony, the North Carolina Symphony. So she's going to be playing as a soloist with the North Carolina Symphony in May. She'll be playing the Sibelius Violin Concerto, and she'll be using violin number 2, which she has been playing for the past year and a half or so.
Beautiful. How old are your daughters?
They're 18 and 20.
Wow.
And
Do they plan to, that's what they want to do, right?
Yeah, they're both studying in conservatories now, so they want to try to make music part of their life one way or another. And I wish them the best of luck. They've got a lot of talent, and they're working really hard. And it's certainly a profession where you've got to put in the sweat equity. You've got to have the talent and maybe a little bit of luck too to make a go of it.
Definitely wish them the best. And thank you so much, David Finck, for being on the show. So if you have any more shout-outs, you can do it now. Otherwise, I'll say good evening. Any more shout-outs to anyone?
I think we're good. I appreciate you very much for having me on.
Absolutely. So check out his 2 websites, folks. If you're interested in woodworking or violin making, this is a good place to start because he makes really, really beautiful stuff. Now, my name is Patricia A. Murray. What you can do if you want to be on the show is write to me at durhamskywriter@gmail.com. If you're in the area, or even if you're not and you've never seen an all-positive newspaper, go to durhamskywriter.com and read the Durham Skywriter. That's Durham, North Carolina's online community paper. I'm no longer doing Radio Skywriter. I did appreciate being with WNCU I think I was with them for about 12 or 13 years. I had a Latin jazz show called Rice and Beans, and then I started doing Radio Skywriter when I started doing the Durham Skywriter. So I send them my love. And with that, have a real good week, and I will see you next Sunday. Ciao. And thanks a lot, Mr. Finck.
You're very welcome.
Absolutely. Ciao for now.